The rain fell in sheets across the interstate, turning the asphalt into a river of reflected headlights and painted lines that blurred beneath the downpour. Marcus Webb gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck with both hands, leaning forward to peer through the windshield where the wipers worked frantically but uselessly against the deluge. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47, and the stretch of highway cutting through the pine forests outside Portland had been empty for the last 20 minutes. Most sensible people had found shelter hours ago. Marcus was heading home late after a longer-than-usual delivery run to the mountain towns, his truck bed empty now, the cargo of supplies distributed to the small general stores that dotted the rural communities clinging to the slopes. He'd made this drive 1,000 times, knew every curve and dip, every place where the road narrowed or where deer liked to cross. The familiarity made the long hours bearable, gave him time to think, to plan tomorrow's schedule, to remember to pick up groceries before Maria got home from school. The lights appeared suddenly around a bend, flickering red and blue through the curtain of rain, distorted by the water streaming down his windshield. Marcus's foot moved instinctively to the brake, and the truck slowed, tires hissing on the wet pavement. His first thought was an accident. His second thought, born from years of training he'd tried to leave behind, was ambush. He pushed that second thought away. This wasn't Kandahar or Mosul. This was Oregon. This was home. He pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards from the lights, put the truck in park, and sat for a moment with the engine running and the heater blowing warm air that smelled faintly of diesel and old coffee. Through the rain, he could make out the shape of a patrol car, its angle all wrong, the vehicle tilted and partially off the road. No other cars, no ambulance, no fire truck. Just the patrol car and its dying lights, and the rain hammering down on everything. Marcus killed the engine and reached for his jacket in the passenger seat, then changed his mind. A jacket wouldn't help in this weather. He'd be soaked in seconds regardless. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment instead, tested it, beam strong and white, and opened the door. The cold hit him immediately, rain driving sideways now, each drop feeling like a small stone against his face and hands. He'd worn a long-sleeve shirt and jeans this morning, clothes meant for mild autumn weather, not this. His boots splashed through puddles as he jogged toward the patrol car, flashlight beam bouncing with each step. The vehicle had gone off the road and struck a tree. The front end crumpled, the driver's side door pushed inward. The lights were still flashing but growing dimmer, the battery failing. Steam or smoke rose from under the hood, though the rain made it hard to tell which. The smell reached him before he got close. Oil, coolant, gasoline, and something metallic that made his stomach tighten. Blood. Marcus moved faster, came around to the driver's side, and swept his flashlight across the interior. The beam caught a face, dark skin wet with rain that was coming in through the shattered driver's window, natural hair matted and sticking to her forehead and cheeks. A woman, young, wearing a police uniform that was torn and soaked through. Her eyes were closed, her head lolled to one side. The airbag had deployed and then deflated, and she was slumped against it, held in place by her seatbelt. "Hey," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, pupils dilated even in the brightness of his flashlight. She tried to speak, her lips moving, but no sound came out at first. Marcus leaned closer, shifting the flashlight so it wasn't pointing directly at her face. "Take it easy," he said. "I'm going to help you." This time her voice came through, barely a whisper, each word an obvious effort. "Called for backup. 20 minutes ago. They're not coming." Marcus looked around, scanning the empty road behind him, the dark forest on either side. 20 minutes was too long. Way too long. Something was wrong. His eyes went back to her uniform, took in the badge on her chest, Officer J. Martinez, badge number 2847, and then dropped lower to where her hands were pressed against her abdomen. The uniform was dark there, soaked with something darker than rain. "I need to see where you're hurt," Marcus said, already moving, already falling back into patterns he'd learned in another life. "I'm going to touch you now, okay?" She nodded slightly, and he reached in through the broken window, carefully moving her hands aside. The flashlight revealed what he'd suspected: a deep laceration across her lower abdomen, the Kevlar vest torn where something sharp had punched through. Maybe metal from the crash, maybe something else. Blood was flowing steadily, too much blood, the kind of bleeding that didn't stop on its own. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, tried to dial, and saw what he expected. No signal. The forest was too dense here, the mountains too close. Cell coverage had always been spotty on this stretch. "Phone's not working," he said, keeping his voice calm, steady. "But I'm not leaving you here." "What's your name?" "Jordan," she managed. "Jordan Martinez." "Okay, Jordan. I'm Marcus. I've got some training. I'm going to stop the bleeding, and then we're getting you out of here." Her eyes focused on him for a moment, really seeing him, and he watched her trying to assess him, trying to decide if she could trust him. Cop instincts, even now. "Who are you?" "Just someone passing through," Marcus said, and that was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. "A long time ago, I was a medic. Military. I know what I'm doing." She blinked slowly, processing this. "The people who ran me off the road. They might come back." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better move fast." He ran back to his truck, boots pounding on the wet asphalt, rain soaking through his shirt until it clung to his skin. The cold didn't register anymore. His mind was already moving through a checklist, muscle memory taking over despite the years. In the back of the truck, hidden under a tarp and some empty crates, was a metal case he'd kept from his service days. He'd told himself 100 times he should get rid of it, that keeping it was pointless, that he wasn't that person anymore. But he'd never been able to throw it away, and now he understood why. The case was olive drab, military issue, scratched and dented from use. Marcus flipped the latches and opened it under the inadequate shelter of his truck bed. Inside, packed neatly in foam, was everything he'd need. Hemostatic gauze, trauma bandages, chest seals, a tourniquet, surgical gloves, scissors, tape, even some expired but probably still functional pain medication. He grabbed what he needed, stuffed it into his pockets, and ran back. Jordan's eyes were closed again when he reached her. "Jordan," he said sharply, "stay with me." "I need you awake." Her eyes opened halfway. "Cold." "I know. We're going to fix that." Marcus snapped on a pair of surgical gloves, the latex tight against his hands. "I'm going to cut your seatbelt and then get you out of here, but first I need to pack this wound." "It's going to hurt. I'm not going to lie to you." "Everything already hurts." "Fair point." Marcus worked quickly, cutting through her uniform to expose the wound fully. It was worse than he'd thought, a deep puncture, possibly nicking the peritoneum. Internal bleeding was likely. She needed surgery, needed it soon. But that wasn't an option right now. Right now, all he could do was buy her time. He tore open a package of hemostatic gauze, the kind that promoted clotting, and began packing the wound. Jordan screamed, her back arching against the seat, her hands coming up to push him away. Marcus caught her wrists gently, but firmly. "I know," he said, his voice steady, despite the way his heart was hammering. "I know it hurts. But if I don't do this, you bleed out in the next 10 minutes, so I need you to hold on. Can you do that for me?" She was breathing hard, her face twisted in agony, but she nodded. Marcus continued packing the wound, methodical and thorough, every movement practiced and precise. The rain continued to pour down, soaking him completely, but his hands stayed steady. This was what he'd been trained for. This was what he'd done in the mountains of Afghanistan, in the deserts of Iraq, in places without names on maps where men died if you made a single mistake. When the wound was packed, he wrapped it with a trauma bandage, pulling it tight, securing it with practiced efficiency. Jordan's breathing was shallow but more stable. Her eyes were open, watching him work. "You've done this before," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "A few times." "Where?" "Places you wouldn't want to visit." Marcus finished securing the bandage and sat back slightly, assessing his work. The bleeding had slowed significantly. Not stopped. He couldn't stop it completely without a surgical suite, but slowed enough to buy them time. "Okay, next problem. We need to get you out of this car before it becomes a bigger problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves fire." Marcus could smell gasoline more strongly now, could see where the fuel line had ruptured. One spark and this whole thing would go up. "Can you move your legs?" Jordan tried, winced. "Not really." "Then I'm going to have to carry you." Marcus pulled out his pocket knife, flicked it open, and cut through her seatbelt. The webbing parted with a snap, and Jordan sagged forward. He caught her, one arm under her shoulders, the other under her knees, and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, maybe 130 soaking wet, and the adrenaline made it easier. He turned and started walking away from the car, moving as quickly as he dared on the slick pavement. They'd made it about 30 feet when Jordan said, "Wait." Marcus kept walking. "No time. My weapon's still in the car. Not worth dying for. It's department property. I'm responsible." The explosion cut her off, a sudden roar and bloom of orange light that lit up the forest. Marcus felt the heat wash over his back, felt Jordan flinch against him, and he broke into a run, putting more distance between them and the burning wreck. Pieces of metal and glass rained down around them, hissing as they hit puddles. The flames roared despite the rain, fed by gasoline and oil and everything else flammable in the vehicle. Marcus didn't stop until they were 100 yards away, and even then he only slowed, not stopping completely until they were well off the road and into the tree line, where the forest offered some shelter from the wind. He lowered Jordan carefully onto a bed of pine needles that was only slightly less wet than everything else, propped her up against a tree trunk. "You okay?" he asked, checking her bandage, making sure the explosion hadn't jostled anything loose. Jordan stared at the burning patrol car, her face illuminated by the distant flames. "That was my ride. Better the car than you." She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in his face, his eyes, the way he moved with absolute certainty even in chaos. "Who are you really?" Marcus sat back on his heels, rain dripping from his hair, his shirt plastered to his chest. "Like I said, just someone passing through. Military medics don't just pass through. They're stationed somewhere. What's your unit?" "Don't have one anymore." "Haven't for years." "But you did." Marcus didn't answer, just pulled out his phone again, checked for a signal. Still nothing. They were going to have to walk to the main road, or at least to somewhere high enough to get reception, and Jordan couldn't walk, which meant carrying her again. "Tell me what happened," he said instead. "You said someone ran you off the road?" Jordan closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were harder, more focused. The shock was wearing off, being replaced by something else. Anger, maybe. Determination. "I was following a suspect. Small-time dealer we've been watching, but we think he's connected to something bigger, cartel operation. He made me, called for backup, and suddenly I had 2 vehicles boxing me in. They forced me off the road, into that tree. I hit my head, crashed through my vest somehow when the steering column collapsed. By the time I came to, they were gone. They left you for dead. Guess they figured the crash would finish the job." Marcus considered this, his mind working through the implications. Cartel. Of course it was cartel. It was always cartel these days. The Sinaloa operation had spread north from California years ago, setting up distribution networks through the Pacific Northwest. He'd read about it in the papers, heard about it on the news, done his absolute best to ignore it. That was law enforcement's problem, not his. He wasn't that person anymore. But sitting here in the rain with a bleeding police officer who would have died if he hadn't stopped, he felt the old anger stirring, the old purpose, the same cartel, the same pattern, different state, different city, but the same goddamn story. How many times? How many more officers left to die on lonely roads? "We need to move," Marcus said, pushing those thoughts away. "Main Road is half a mile that way. I can get a signal from there, call an ambulance. I can't walk." "I know, I'll carry you." "You can't carry me half a mile." Marcus looked at her steadily. "Yes, I can." He lifted her again, this time settling her into a fireman's carry, her weight distributed across his shoulders. It wasn't comfortable, for either of them, but it was efficient. He could maintain this for a while if he had to, and he would have to. The walk was brutal. Every step jostled Jordan, making her bite back cries of pain. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the path through the forest was treacherous with exposed roots and slick leaves. Marcus's boots found purchase where they could, his legs burning with the effort of carrying her weight plus his own through the difficult terrain. His breath came harder, his heart pounding, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This was the mission now, and you didn't quit on a mission. "Tell me about your family," Jordan said after a few minutes, her voice strained but audible over the rain. "Why?" "Need something to focus on, besides the pain." Marcus adjusted his grip slightly, kept walking. "Got a daughter. 11 years old, smart kid, too smart sometimes. What's her name?" "Sophia." "She know what you did? In the military?" "She knows I was a medic. Doesn't know the details." "Why not?" "Because I don't want her to carry that weight." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. "She doesn't need to know about the things I saw, the things I had to do. She gets to be a kid. That's the whole point." Jordan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your wife? Is she at home?" Marcus's step faltered just for a second before he caught himself and continued. "No. Divorced? Dead." The word came out flat, matter-of-fact. 5 years ago. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Just stay alive. That's all I need from you right now." They lapsed into silence after that, Jordan conserving her strength, Marcus focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. The trees thinned gradually, and he could see the glow of the main highway ahead, the occasional flash of headlights as cars passed. Civilization. Help. He emerged from the tree line with Jordan still on his shoulders, stepped onto the shoulder of the highway and flagged down the first vehicle he saw. A semi-truck with Oregon plates. The driver's face briefly visible in the cab before the truck pulled over with a hiss of air brakes. The driver climbed down, a broad-shouldered man with dark skin and greying hair, took one look at Jordan and Marcus and immediately pulled out his phone. "Jesus Christ! What happened?" "Car accident," Marcus said, lowering Jordan carefully onto the drier ground near the truck's massive tires. "She needs an ambulance, now." The trucker was already dialing. "Yeah, I need emergency services. Interstate 26, eastbound, mile marker 47. Police officer injured, looks bad." He rattled off the details, then hung up. "They're coming." 10 minutes, they said. Marcus nodded, checked Jordan's bandage again, still holding. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, but she was conscious and breathing. That was something. "You did that?" the trucker asked, gesturing to the bandage. "Yeah." "You're a doctor?" "Was a medic." The trucker looked at Marcus with something like awe. "You saved her life, man." Marcus didn't respond, just stayed with Jordan, one hand on her shoulder, keeping her grounded, keeping her present. The trucker waited with them, not speaking, just present, and Marcus was grateful for that. Some people felt the need to fill silence with words. This man understood that silence could be a comfort. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, not 10, lights blazing and siren wailing. Paramedics jumped out, a man and a woman, both moving with practiced efficiency. The woman, Hispanic with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, knelt beside Jordan and immediately began assessing her. "What happened?" she asked, her hands already checking vitals, examining the wound. "Car accident," Marcus said. "Single vehicle, hit a tree. Deep laceration to the abdomen, possible internal bleeding. I packed it with hemostatic gauze about 20 minutes ago." The paramedic looked up at him sharply. "You did this?" "Yeah." She turned her attention back to the bandage, carefully lifting the edge to examine his work. Her partner, a younger black man with nervous energy, watched over her shoulder. The woman let out a low whistle. "This is textbook trauma care," she said. "Military." "Used to be." "Well, you saved her life." She'd have bled out without this. The paramedic started an IV line, hung a bag of saline. "Okay, let's get her loaded up." They worked quickly, transferring Jordan to a stretcher, securing her, wheeling her toward the ambulance. Marcus stepped back, his job done, ready to fade into the background. But Jordan reached out, caught his wrist as they passed. "Thank you," she said, her voice weak but sincere. Marcus nodded. "Stay safe, Officer Martinez." "Jordan. Call me Jordan. Stay safe, Jordan." They loaded her into the ambulance, and the female paramedic turned back to Marcus before climbing in. "Police will want a statement. Don't leave, okay? I'll be here." The ambulance pulled away, sirens screaming, and Marcus was left standing on the side of the highway with the trucker and the rain. He felt suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining away and leaving nothing but fatigue and the cold. His clothes were soaked through, his muscles aching, and all he wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and forget this night ever happened. But the paramedic was right. The police would want a statement. He'd have to wait. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, all with their hands near their weapons, until they identified Marcus and the trucker as civilians. One of them, a young white officer with a buzz cut and the bearing of someone fresh from the academy, approached. "You the one who found Officer Martinez?" "That's right." "We're going to need you to come with us. Give a full statement." "Can I drive myself?" "Follow you to the station." The officer looked uncertain, glanced back at his partner, a woman with dark hair pulled into a neat braid. She shrugged. "Yeah, that should be fine. You're not a suspect, just a witness." Marcus nodded, walked back to his truck that was still parked on the shoulder where he'd left it, and climbed into the cab. The heater had long since turned off, and the interior was cold, but at least it was dry. He started the engine, pulled out onto the highway, and followed the patrol cars toward the city. The drive gave him time to think, time to process what had just happened. He'd told himself for 5 years that he was done with all of this, that he'd walked away from that life and wouldn't look back. But here he was, covered in someone else's blood, following police cars to give a statement about a cartel ambush. Some things, it seemed, you couldn't walk away from. They followed you whether you wanted them to or not. The police station was a squat concrete building on the edge of downtown Portland, surrounded by parking lots and chain-link fencing. Marcus pulled into a visitor spot, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Inside that building would be questions, lots of questions, and he'd have to decide how much to tell them. The truth was complicated. The truth involved things he'd rather leave buried. But Jordan Martinez was alive because he'd told enough of the truth to help her. Maybe that was what mattered. He got out, locked the truck, and walked toward the station entrance where the young officer was waiting. "This way," the officer said, holding the door open. Marcus stepped inside. The interview room was exactly what he expected. Small, windowless, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs on either side. The walls were painted an institutional beige that seemed designed to be as emotionally neutral as possible. A camera in the corner blinked a steady red light. Marcus sat in the chair facing the door, folded his hands on the table, and waited. The young officer, whose nameplate read Patterson, sat across from him with a notepad and pen. Old school. Marcus appreciated that. Digital records could be hacked. Paper was harder to manipulate. "Let's start with your name," Patterson said. "Marcus Webb." "Address?" Marcus rattled it off. "A house number on Oak Street in one of the eastern suburbs, a small neighborhood where people kept to themselves. And you were driving home from where?" "Work. I drive a delivery truck. Small goods to rural stores up in the mountains. Made my last stop around 9:30, was heading home when I came across the accident." Patterson wrote this down. "What time did you find Officer Martinez?" "Around 11:45, maybe 11:50. "And you stopped because there was a crashed police car and someone inside who needed help." "Did you see anyone else at the scene? Any other vehicles?" "No. Just the patrol car." "Officer Martinez mentioned that she'd been run off the road. Did you see any signs of that?" Marcus thought about how to answer this. The car had clearly been in a collision before it hit the tree. There was damage consistent with being struck by another vehicle, but I didn't see anyone else there. Patterson made notes. "And you're a medic? Is that your training?" "Was a medic. Army. Combat medic, specifically. I was trained to handle trauma in field conditions." "How long were you in?" 12 years. "When did you get out?" 5 years ago. Honorable discharge." Patterson looked up from his notes. "Can I ask why you left?" Marcus met his eyes. "Personal reasons." "That's not really an answer." "It's the one you're getting." They stared at each other for a moment, and Marcus could see Patterson trying to decide whether to push. Ultimately he chose not to, which showed more wisdom than Marcus had expected. "Okay," Patterson said. "Walk me through what you did when you found Officer Martinez." Marcus went through it step by step, clinically, the way he'd write an after-action report. Found her unconscious, assessed her injuries, retrieved his medical kit from his truck, stabilized the wound, cut her free from the seatbelt, carried her away from the vehicle before it exploded. He left out his thoughts, his feelings, the way his hands had moved on autopilot through procedures he'd performed 100 times before. Those details weren't relevant. When he finished, Patterson had filled several pages with notes. "And you just happened to have a military-grade medical kit in your truck." "I keep it for emergencies. Most people keep a first aid kit from the pharmacy." "I'm not most people." Patterson studied him, and Marcus could see the questions forming, the suspicions. A former combat medic with advanced trauma supplies driving around at night on a lonely road. It looked strange. He understood that. But there was nothing illegal about being prepared. "Is that everything?" Marcus asked. "For now. We may have follow-up questions." "You know where to find me." Marcus stood, and Patterson did the same. "One more thing," Patterson said. "Captain wants to see you before you go." "Why?" "Didn't say. But when the captain asks, you show up." Marcus followed Patterson through the maze of corridors in the station, past desks where officers typed reports and drank coffee, past holding cells and interrogation rooms, until they reached a corner office with a frosted glass door. Patterson knocked, waited for the "come in," and then opened the door and gestured for Marcus to enter. The office was neat but lived in, the walls covered with commendations and photos of officers in dress uniform. Behind the desk sat a man in his late 50s, his dark skin weathered, his hair going grey at the temples. He wore the uniform of a police captain, crisp and precise, and his eyes were sharp and assessing as they fixed on Marcus. "Mr. Webb," the man said, standing and extending his hand across the desk. "Captain Vincent Shaw. Thank you for coming." Marcus shook his hand, noted the firm grip, the calluses that spoke of someone who still trained regularly. "Officer Patterson said you wanted to see me." "I did." Please sit." Marcus sat, and Captain Shaw settled back into his chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Shaw was sizing him up, and Marcus let him. He had nothing to hide. "Officer Martinez is stable," Shaw said finally. "Thanks to you. The surgeons at Memorial said if she'd arrived 15 minutes later, she wouldn't have made it. Your field dressing bought her that time. Glad I could help. I've seen a lot of trauma wounds, Mr. Webb. Dealt with a lot of emergencies. What you did out there, that wasn't just first aid, that was advanced battlefield medicine." Marcus didn't respond. "I pulled your record," Shaw continued, "or tried to. Most of it's classified, but I can see enough. 12 years in Army Special Forces, multiple deployments, combat medic, Silver Star, Purple Heart, and then you just walked away. People leave the military all the time, Captain. Not people like you. People with your skills, your experience. They usually go into contracting, make serious money teaching other soldiers, or they stay in, go up the ranks. They don't drive delivery trucks in Oregon." Marcus felt the old walls going up, the defensive barriers he'd built to protect himself from questions like these. "Is there a point to this conversation?" Shaw leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "The cartel that went after Officer Martinez, they're the same ones operating through this region. Same tactics they used in California, Arizona, New Mexico. Violent, organized, well-armed. We've been trying to get ahead of them for 2 years, but they're always a step ahead. They know how we operate. They know our protocols. I still don't see what this has to do with me. I think you do." Shaw opened a folder on his desk, pulled out a photograph, and slid it across to Marcus. "This was found at the scene of Officer Martinez's crash. Security camera from a house up the road caught this vehicle fleeing the area." Marcus looked at the photograph. It showed a black SUV with tinted windows. Expensive, the kind of vehicle that screamed cartel money. "That SUV belongs to the Morales organization," Shaw said, "Sinaloa affiliate. They've been expanding north, setting up operations all along the I-5 corridor, and they're smart about it. Military-level tactical planning, which means someone with experience is training them." Marcus pushed the photograph back across the desk. "Still waiting for the part where this involves me." Shaw's expression hardened. "Your wife, Lisa Webb, patrol officer, killed 5 years ago during a traffic stop in Sacramento. The shooters were never caught, but intelligence suggested cartel involvement, the same Morales organization. The room went very quiet. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, felt the old grief and rage stirring beneath the carefully maintained calm. He'd known this conversation was coming the moment Shaw had said he pulled his record, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. "That case is closed," Marcus said, his voice flat. "Closed doesn't mean solved. The investigation hit dead ends. No witnesses, no evidence, just your wife dead on the side of the road and 3 men who disappeared into the wind. I'm aware. I lived it. And then you left Sacramento, left the army, came up here and started driving trucks." Shaw paused. "Some would say you ran away." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Are we done here? Sit down, Mr. Webb. Why? So you can tell me more about how my wife died?" "I was there, Captain. I identified her body. I buried her. I raised our daughter alone while you people failed to catch the men responsible. So forgive me if I'm not interested in taking a trip down memory lane." Shaw didn't flinch, didn't back down. "Sit down." Something in his tone made Marcus pause. Not anger, not threat, just certainty. Marcus sat slowly. "I'm not trying to open old wounds," Shaw said, his voice softer now. "I'm trying to stop new ones." Officer Martinez is 27 years old. She's been on the force for 2 years. She's smart, dedicated, and passionate about making a difference. Tonight the cartel tried to kill her because she was getting close to something they didn't want found, and they almost succeeded. But they didn't. She'll recover. This time, what about next time? or the time after that. Shaw tapped the photograph. These people are escalating, Mr. Webb. They used to avoid confrontation with law enforcement. Now they're actively targeting us. And my officers, good officers, trained officers, don't have the experience to counter that level of sophistication. Marcus saw where this was going. You want me to train them? I want you to consult. Review our tactical procedures. Teach my people how to survive encounters with an enemy that thinks like a military unit. You've been on the other side of this. You know how insurgents operate. That's what these cartels are. Insurgents with better funding. I'm not a cop. I don't need you to be a cop. I need you to be what you are. A soldier who kept people alive when everything went to hell. Marcus shook his head. I left that life behind for a reason, Captain. I have a daughter to think about. Getting involved with cartel investigations is a good way to end up dead, or worse, to make her a target. The best way to protect your daughter is to stop the people who killed her mother. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to walk out of this office and never look back. But Shaw was right. The cartel wasn't going to stop. They were going to keep expanding, keep killing, keep destroying families, just like they'd destroyed his. If I did this, Marcus said slowly, I wouldn't be going into the field. I'd be strictly an advisor, review your plans, train your people, and that's it. That's all I'm asking. And you clear it with everyone. I'm not working with officers who resent having a civilian telling them what to do. I'll make sure they understand the situation. Marcus looked at the photograph again, at the black SUV that represented everything he'd tried to leave behind. Then he thought about Jordan Martinez, bleeding out in the rain, whispering that backup wasn't coming. He thought about Lisa, dead on the pavement 5 years ago. He thought about Sophia, growing up without her mother, and all the other children who would grow up without parents if this continued. When do I start? He asked. Shaw allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. I'll introduce you to the team. Marcus stood, and this time Shaw didn't stop him. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Captain? This doesn't change anything. I'm not that person anymore. No, Shaw agreed. You're someone better. You're that person who chooses to help anyway. Marcus left without responding. He walked through the station, past the desks and the officers and the whole machinery of law enforcement, got in his truck and drove home through streets that were finally starting to dry as the rain let up. The dashboard clock read 3:15 a.m. Sophia would be asleep. He could slip in quietly, shower, and maybe get a few hours of sleep before morning came, and everything changed again. His house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a small ranch-style place with a yard that needed mowing and paint that needed refreshing. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. He pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the darkness, gathering himself. Inside, the house was quiet. He moved through the living room, furniture bought second-hand, Sophia's drawings covering the fridge, a stack of her schoolbooks on the coffee table, and down the hall to her room. The door was open a crack, the way she liked it, and he pushed it gently wider. Sophia was asleep in her bed, one arm thrown over her head, her dark hair splayed across the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, and Marcus felt the familiar ache in his chest. She looked like Lisa. Same face shape, same expressions. Every day she grew older, the resemblance became stronger. He pulled her door closed quietly and went to his own room, stripped off his wet clothes, and stood under a hot shower until his skin turned red and the last of the cold finally left his bones. When he climbed into bed, exhaustion pulled him under almost immediately. But his dreams were full of rain and blood and flashing lights, and a voice whispering that backup wasn't coming. Morning arrived too soon. Marcus woke to his alarm at 6:30, groggy and stiff, every muscle in his body protesting from the previous night's exertions. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, seriously considering calling Shaw and backing out. He could still walk away. He didn't owe anyone anything. But then he heard Sophia's voice from the kitchen, talking to herself the way she did when she was making breakfast, and he remembered why he'd agreed to help in the first place. Not for revenge, not for closure, but to make sure other kids didn't lose their parents. He got up, dressed in clean clothes, jeans, a plain button-down shirt, his work boots, and went to the kitchen. Sophia was at the stove, carefully flipping a pancake. She'd inherited Lisa's love of cooking, though at 11 she was still learning. "Morning, Dad," she said without turning around. "Want pancakes?" "Sure. Since when do you make pancakes on a school day?" "Since I woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep." She slid a pancake onto a plate, added 2 more and carried it to the table. "You got home late last night. I heard you come in." Marcus poured coffee, took a pancake from the pile. "Had to stop and help someone. Car accident." Sophia's eyes widened. "Was anyone hurt?" "Yeah, but they'll be okay." "Did you use your medic stuff?" "Little bit." She studied him the way only a daughter can, seeing through his casual tone to the truth beneath. "You're doing that thing where you don't tell me the whole story." "What thing?" "That thing where you act like it's no big deal, but actually it was a big deal." Marcus smiled despite himself. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart." "You just didn't notice." She took a bite of pancake, chewed thoughtfully. "You're going somewhere today." "Not work." "How do you know that?" "You're wearing your button-down shirt. You only wear that when you have to look professional." "Okay, you're definitely too smart." Marcus finished his coffee. "I'm going to help the police department for a while. Training stuff. Teaching them medical procedures. Like your army stuff. Sort of. But safer." Sophia didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. That was another thing she'd learned from Lisa, when to let something go. "Okay, but be careful, okay?" "Always am." After breakfast, Marcus drove Sophia to school, watched her disappear into the building with her backpack and her determination to be too grown up, and then headed toward the police station. The morning was clear, the storm from last night completely gone, leaving the streets washed clean and the air sharp. Traffic was light. He made good time. Captain Shaw met him in the lobby at exactly 8 a.m., along with a woman Marcus didn't recognize. Late 30s, Hispanic, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone used to command. "Mr. Webb," Shaw said, "this is Lieutenant Carmen Rodriguez. She'll be your primary liaison. Anything you need, you go through her." Marcus shook her hand. "Just Marcus is fine." "Carmen." She gestured toward the interior of the building. "Captain filled me in on your background. Impressive record. Ancient history. Not so ancient that you forgot how to save a life." Carmen led them through the station to a conference room where a dozen officers waited, all in uniform, all watching Marcus with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Everyone, this is Marcus Webb. He'll be consulting with us on tactical procedures and combat medicine. I expect everyone to give him your full cooperation." The officers murmured acknowledgement, but Marcus could see the doubt in their faces. He was a civilian, an outsider. Why should they listen to him? Captain Shaw stepped forward. "I know some of you are wondering why we're bringing in outside help. The simple answer is that we're facing a threat that's evolving faster than our training can keep up with. The cartel operating in this region has military-level tactical training. They plan operations like soldiers, they move like soldiers, and they fight like soldiers. Mr. Webb has 12 years of experience dealing with exactly that kind of enemy. He's going to teach you how to survive encounters that your academy training didn't prepare you for." One of the officers raised his hand, a white man in his early 30s, with the build of someone who spent serious time in the gym. With respect, sir, how do we know his information is current? Military tactics from 10 years ago might not apply anymore. Good question, Marcus said before Shaw could respond. He stepped forward, positioning himself where everyone could see him. You're right. Tactics evolve, equipment improves, enemies adapt, but the fundamentals don't change. Trauma care is trauma care. Threat assessment is threat assessment, and the psychology of violence, that's been the same since humans started fighting each other. But you're not a cop, another officer said, a black woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun. You don't know what it's like on the streets. True. I don't, but I know what it's like to get ambushed in hostile territory. I know what it's like to treat a sucking chest wound while someone's shooting at you. I know what it's like to carry a dying friend half a mile because there's no medevac coming. Marcus met her eyes. Last night, one of your own was left to die on a lonely road because the cartel thought they could eliminate her without consequence. If she'd waited for backup, she'd be dead. Instead, she got someone who happened to have the training to keep her alive. This isn't about replacing your training, it's about adding to it. The room was quiet now, the skepticism replaced by something else, attention, respect maybe, or at least willingness to listen. We'll start with basics, Marcus said. Combat medicine. How to triage in the field, how to treat traumatic injuries when you can't wait for paramedics. Then we'll move into tactical awareness, reading environments, anticipating ambushes, operating in hostile territory. By the time we're done, you'll be better equipped to face what's coming. Carmen stepped forward. We've set aside 3 hours every morning this week for training. After that, we'll reassess based on need. Any questions? No one spoke. All right then, Carmen said. Let's get started. The next 3 hours were intensive. Marcus walked them through basic trauma care, how to pack a wound, how to apply a tourniquet correctly, how to recognize when someone was going into shock and what to do about it. He used training dummies, simulated wounds, and made them practice until their hands moved automatically. Muscle memory was everything. In a crisis, you didn't have time to think, you just reacted. Most of the officers picked it up quickly. They were trained observers, used to high-stress situations, and the medical procedures made sense to them. A few struggled with the hands-on aspect, squeamish about the realistic wounds Marcus had set up. He was patient with them, walking them through it step by step but firm. If they couldn't handle fake blood, they definitely couldn't handle the real thing. During a break, Carmen approached him. You're good at this. I've had practice. Teaching. Keeping people calm while they learn things they don't want to think about. Marcus watched the officers getting coffee, talking among themselves. How many of them have been in actual gunfights? About half. The rest have been lucky so far. Lucky doesn't last. That's why you're here, Marcus turned to face her. What's the real situation with the cartel? Shaw gave me the overview, but I need details. What are we actually dealing with? Carmen glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. The Morales organization moved into Portland 2 years ago. Started small. Distribution, money laundering, the usual. But 6 months ago, things escalated. They hit a rival crew, killed 4 people, burned their operation to the ground. Since then, they've been expanding aggressively. And they're not afraid of law enforcement anymore. They used to avoid us. Now, they challenge us. What changed? We don't know. But intelligence suggests they brought in someone with military experience, someone who's training their enforcers in tactical operations. That's what we're up against. Marcus processed this. A cartel with military training was dangerous enough, but a cartel being actively trained by someone with professional experience, that was a different level of threat. You have any leads on who's doing the training? Nothing solid. DEA has some theories, but no names. What about Martinez? What was she investigating that got her targeted? She was following a low-level dealer we picked up last week. He mentioned something about a big shipment coming in, a warehouse operation. Jordan was trying to verify the location when they went after her. You think they knew she was a cop? Must have. The level of coordination, 2 vehicles, forcing her off the road at a specific location where cell coverage drops, that wasn't spontaneous. That was planned. Marcus felt the familiar chill of tactical analysis. Carmen was right. That kind of operation required reconnaissance, planning, and execution, military-level thinking. Which means they have someone inside, or they're conducting surveillance on your offices. That's our working theory. And you're still planning to hit their warehouse? Carmen nodded. Friday night. We've got the location confirmed, we've got a warrant being prepared, and we've got tactical backup from the state police. This is the biggest operation they've set up in our jurisdiction. If we can take it down, we cripple their distribution network. Or you walk into an ambush. That's why you're here. To make sure that doesn't happen. Marcus thought about this. A warehouse raid against an enemy with military training. Multiple variables, lots of ways for things to go wrong. He'd need to see their operational plan, review the warehouse location, assess potential threats, and he'd need to do it in 3 days. I want to see everything, he said. Blueprints of the warehouse, surveillance photos, intelligence reports, everything you have. I'll have it ready by this afternoon. And I want to talk to Martinez. Get her perspective on what happened, what she saw. She's still in the hospital, but I can arrange it. Good. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. I'm not losing any more officers to these people. Carmen studied him for a moment, and Marcus saw understanding in her eyes. She knew what drove him. She knew this wasn't just about tactics or training. This was personal. We'll get them, she said quietly. The people who killed your wife. Maybe. But that's not why I'm doing this. Then why? Marcus looked past her, at the officers getting ready to resume training. Young faces, determined faces, people who'd chosen to put themselves in danger to protect others, because someone has to, and it might as well be me. That afternoon, after the training session ended, Marcus sat in a conference room with Carmen and reviewed the intelligence on the warehouse operation. The building was in an industrial district on the east side of the river, surrounded by other warehouses and factories, most of which operated during the day but were empty at night. Perfect location for a clandestine operation. The surveillance photos showed a 2-story structure, concrete and steel, with large bay doors for loading and unloading. Multiple access points, front entrance, back loading dock, side door, roof access via an external staircase. The building had been abandoned for years before the cartel moved in. How many people do we think are inside at any given time? Marcus asked. Based on surveillance, anywhere from 6 to 12. They rotate in shifts, probably to avoid drawing attention. Armed. Heavily. We've seen them carrying semi-automatic weapons. Possibly full auto, though we can't confirm that. Marcus traced possible approach routes on the blueprint. What's your plan? Carmen opened a tactical folder. We go in with 2 teams. Team 1 hits the front entrance with a battering ram and flashbangs. Team 2 secures the back loading dock. Once we have both exits locked down, we clear the building room by room. That's a standard dynamic entry. Against a normal operation, it would probably work. But if they have military training, they'll be expecting it. They'll have fortified positions, overlapping fields of fire, maybe even IEDs at the entry points. You send your people through those doors, and you're feeding them into a kill zone. Carmen's expression tightened. So what do you suggest? Marcus studied the blueprints, his mind running through scenarios. You need to change the pattern. Instead of hitting both doors simultaneously, you create a diversion at the front while your main force goes through an unexpected entry point. Here, he tapped the side of the building, there's a service door that the surveillance probably missed. It's away from the main operations area. You breach there with a small team, move quietly, establish position inside, and then coordinate your assault from within while the front team creates noise and draws attention. That's risky. Splitting our forces, going in with minimal backup. It's riskier to do what they expect. Look, these people have already shown they're willing to kill cops. They ran Martinez off the road without hesitation. If they're in that warehouse and they see your teams coming through the front door, they'll fight. And in a confined space with automatic weapons, your people will take casualties even if they win. Carmen was quiet, considering. Finally, she said, I'll need to run this by Captain Shaw. Do it. But understand, if you go in with a conventional approach, you're playing into their hands. They've been trained to counter exactly that kind of assault. And you know this because it's what I would do. If I were training people to defend against law enforcement, the first thing I'd teach them is to anticipate standard entry tactics. Flashbangs, battering rams, teams coming through established entrances. It's all predictable. The way you survive is to be unpredictable. Carmen gathered up the files. I'll talk to Shaw. In the meantime, go see Martinez. Get her read on things. She's at Memorial Hospital, room 412. Marcus nodded, stood, and left the conference room. The hospital was 15 minutes away, a sprawling modern complex with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. He found room 412 on the 4th floor of the main building, knocked lightly, and entered when he heard Jordan's voice say, "Come in." She was sitting up in bed, looking 1,000 times better than the last time he'd seen her. The pallor was gone, replaced by healthy color, and though she had IV lines running into her arms and monitors beeping softly beside the bed, she was alert and focused. "Mr. Webb," she said, smiling. "I was hoping you'd come by. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but the doctors say I'm healing well. Another few days and I can go home." She gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Please, sit. I wanted to thank you properly." Marcus sat. "You already thanked me." "At the scene. I was half conscious at the scene. I want to thank you now, when I can actually articulate how grateful I am. You saved my life. Just did what anyone would do." "No, you did what almost no one could do. The surgeons told me about your field dressing. They said it was textbook trauma care, the kind of thing they see from military medics in war zones. Without that, I wouldn't have made it to the hospital." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Jordan seemed to understand. "Carmen told me you're consulting with us on the warehouse raid," she said after a moment. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Getting involved like this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "Because of your wife?" "Among other reasons." Jordan nodded slowly. "I read about her case. I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened." "No, it shouldn't have. But it did. And now I'm making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That's a lot of weight to carry." "I've carried worse." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Jordan said, "The men who ran me off the road, they were professionals. The way they boxed me in, the coordination between vehicles, that wasn't amateur hour. Someone trained them. Carmen mentioned that." "Did she tell you what I was investigating?" "She said you were following up on a lead about a warehouse shipment." "Right, but it was more than that." Jordan shifted in her bed, wincing slightly. "The dealer we picked up, he was scared. Really scared. He told us the organization had brought in someone new, someone who was changing how they operated, making them more aggressive, more organized. He didn't have a name, but he said this person had military experience, maybe even special forces. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He say anything else, just that the shipment coming in was big, enough product to supply the entire region for months, and that they were willing to kill to protect it. They proved that when they came after you. Exactly. Jordan met his eyes, which is why I'm worried about the raid. If they were willing to kill one officer investigating from the outside, what do you think they'll do when a full tactical team hits their main operation? Fight. Hard. Or worse, they'll be ready. They'll turn it into a massacre. Marcus stood, walked to the window. Outside, the city stretched away in all directions. Ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware of the violence being planned in their midst. That's why I'm reviewing the tactical plan. To make sure your people don't walk into a trap. Can you stop it? The trap, I mean. I can try. But Jordan, you need to understand something. These people aren't going to stop. Even if we take down the warehouse, even if we arrest everyone there, the organization will adapt. They'll rebuild. They'll bring in new people. This is a long fight, and it doesn't have clean endings. I know, but at least we're fighting. Marcus turned back to her. Is that enough for you? Knowing you might spend your whole career fighting the same enemy without ever really winning, Jordan thought about this. My father was a cop. He worked gangs in LA for 20 years. When I asked him once if it ever got better, you know what he told me? He said, "The fight itself is the point. You don't do this job for the victory. You do it for the people you save along the way." Smart man. He was. He died in the line of duty when I was 16, heart attack during a foot pursuit. Jordan's voice was steady, matter of fact. I became a cop because of him, because I wanted to make the same choice he did, to fight even when winning seems impossible. Marcus returned to the chair, sat down. Then you should know, the raid on Friday. I don't want you anywhere near it. What? Why? Because they tried to kill you once already. If they see you show up to their operation, they'll try again. And next time you might not be so lucky. I'm not going to hide while my colleagues put themselves in danger. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be smart. You're still recovering. You wouldn't be cleared for tactical operations anyway. Jordan's jaw set stubbornly. I can consult. Provide intelligence. I know more about this case than anyone. Then do that from here, from safety. Let the others handle the physical side. You're not my boss, Mr. Webb. No, but I'm someone who's seen what happens when people go into situations they're not ready for. It doesn't end well. They stared at each other, and Marcus could see the frustration in Jordan's eyes, the desire to be part of the action. He understood that. He'd felt the same way once. But he'd also learned, through painful experience, that heroics got people killed. Fine, Jordan said finally. I'll stay here. But I want updates. Everything that happens. I'll make sure you get them. Marcus stood to leave, and Jordan called after him. Mr. Webb? Thank you for caring enough to argue with me. Call me Marcus, and you're welcome. He left the hospital as the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The beauty of it felt incongruous with everything else, the violence, the planning, the sense of impending conflict. But that was life, beautiful and terrible all at once. He drove home, made dinner for Sophia, helped her with homework, and tucked her into bed with the same routine they'd followed for 5 years. Normalcy, stability, the things he'd built to replace what they'd lost. But that night, after Sophia was asleep, Marcus didn't go to bed. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with the files Carmen had given him, studying them by lamplight, analyzing every detail of the warehouse and the planned operation. He made notes, sketched alternate approaches, identified potential problems. Somewhere in Portland, the cartel was making their own plans, and Marcus intended to make sure his side was better prepared. The next 2 days passed in a blur of training sessions, tactical reviews, and planning meetings. Marcus worked closely with Carmen and Captain Shaw, refining the approach to the warehouse raid, drilling the officers on trauma care and tactical awareness. He pushed them hard, demanding precision, accepting nothing less than excellence. Lives depended on getting this right. On Thursday evening, 24 hours before the planned raid, Captain Shaw called a final briefing. The conference room was packed with officers, both the Portland PD tactical team and backup units from the state police. Maps and photographs covered the walls. A three-dimensional model of the warehouse sat on the center table. Shaw stood at the front of the room, commanding attention without effort. "Tomorrow night at 11 p.m., we execute operation on the target warehouse. Based on intelligence and tactical consultation, we're implementing a modified entry plan. Lieutenant Rodriguez will walk you through the details." Carmen stood, activated the projector. A satellite image of the warehouse appeared on the screen. Standard approach would be simultaneous breach at front and rear entries. We're not doing that. Instead, we're dividing into 3 teams. Team Alpha, 6 officers, will stage at the front entrance. At exactly 11:10, they'll make noise, flashbangs, shouting, ram the door but don't enter. The goal is to draw attention and make the occupants think that's the main assault. She clicked to the next slide. Team Bravo, 8 officers, will position at the rear loading dock. Their backup and containment. No one leaves through that exit. Team Charlie, 4 officers plus our consultant, will breach through this side service entrance at exactly 11:11. That's our main assault force. We go in quiet, clear the building from the inside, and neutralize the threat before they can organize a defense. One of the state police officers raised his hand. That's risky, going in with only 4 officers as the primary team. It is, Carmen agreed, but it's less risky than funneling through a fortified entrance directly into their lines of fire. This approach uses surprise and misdirection. They'll be focused on the front door while we're already inside. And what if they've got people watching that side entrance? Then we adapt. That's why we're bringing our consultant. Marcus. Marcus stood, moved to the front. The key to surviving this operation is flexibility. You need to enter expecting everything to go wrong and having plans to deal with it. If the side entrance is watched, we fall back to the loading dock approach. If we encounter heavy resistance inside, we don't push through. We establish a defensive position and call for backup. Pride doesn't keep you alive. Smart tactical decisions do. He picked up a marker, drew on the whiteboard. Once we're inside, we move in a standard stack formation. I'll be in the middle, non-combatant, but I'll be there to provide medical support if anyone goes down. Your job is to clear rooms methodically. Don't rush. Don't assume a room is empty just because you don't see anyone. These people know you're coming. They've had time to prepare. How do you know they've had time? Someone asked. Because organizations like this always have lookouts, always have early warning systems. The moment your team starts staging, someone will notice. Someone will make a call. By the time we hit that door, they'll know we're there. The room absorbed this soberly. But, Marcus continued, knowing we're coming and being able to stop us are different things. If we execute properly, if we stay disciplined and work as a team, we win. Questions? A young officer in the back. Marcus recognized him as Miller, one of the ones who'd been most skeptical during training, raised his hand. Why are you going in with us? You said you were strictly an advisor. I am. But if someone gets hurt, every second counts. I can provide trauma care immediately instead of waiting for paramedics. I won't be carrying a weapon, won't be engaging anyone. I'll stay in the middle of the formation and do my job if it's needed. But you're putting yourself in danger. So are all of you. That's the job. No one had a response to that. Captain Shaw stepped forward again. Final details. We roll out at 10 p.m. Full tactical gear, level 4 body armor. Rules of engagement are standard. Identify yourself as police, give clear commands, use force only if threatened. But understand, these people have already demonstrated willingness to kill officers. Don't hesitate if your life is in danger. Everyone clear? A chorus of affirmatives. Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long night. The briefing broke up, officers dispersing to prepare. Marcus was gathering his notes when Carmen approached. "You ready for this?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be. You could still back out. Stay in the command vehicle." "I could. But then what's the point? I told you I'd help keep your people alive. Can't do that from a parking lot." Carmen smiled slightly. "You know, when Shaw first suggested bringing you in, I wasn't sure. Thought maybe you were just another washed-up soldier looking for relevance. But you're the real deal, aren't you?" "I'm just someone who doesn't want to see more people die." "That's what makes you the real deal." She left, and Marcus was alone in the conference room with maps of a warehouse and the knowledge that in 24 hours everything would change. People might die. Probably would die. The best he could hope for was to minimize casualties, to make sure the right people came home. He thought about Sophia, asleep in her bed, trusting that her father would come home tomorrow like he always did. He'd made her a promise, years ago, that he would never leave her the way her mother had left. He intended to keep that promise, but first, he had to survive tomorrow night. Marcus spent Friday preparing. He checked and rechecked his medical kit, ensuring everything was stocked, that nothing had expired, that he had multiple options for every scenario. Tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, pressure bandages, airway equipment, pain medication, everything organized, accessible, ready. He picked Sophia up from school, took her to her friend's house for a sleepover, a favor he'd arranged earlier in the week, telling her friend's mother only that he had an emergency work situation. No details, no danger, just needs someone to watch Sophia overnight. Sophia had been suspicious. "You never let me do sleepovers on school nights." Special circumstances. What kind of special circumstances? The kind that means I might be out late tonight. I want you somewhere safe and fun instead of sitting home alone. She'd studied his face, seeing more than he wanted her to see. "Dad, are you in trouble?" "No, baby. I promise. Just helping the police with something. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning and we'll get pancakes, okay?" "Okay, but be careful." "Always am." Now at 9:30 p.m., Marcus sat in the parking lot of the police station, watching officers load into vans. They moved with professional efficiency, checking equipment, reviewing assignments, the nervous energy of pre-operation jitters evident in their movements. Some of them were veterans, had done this before. Others were new, scared, trying not to show it. Carmen appeared at his window. "Ride with me?" Marcus got out of his truck, carrying his medical kit, and followed her to one of the tactical vans. Inside, 8 officers sat in full gear, helmets, body armor, tactical vests loaded with ammunition and equipment. They made room for Marcus on the bench, and he sat, aware of the weight of eyes on him. He was the only one not in uniform, the only one without a weapon. He must have looked out of place. The van lurched forward, joining the convoy heading toward the industrial district. The drive took 20 minutes, long enough for Marcus's mind to run through contingencies, to visualize the entry, to mentally prepare for what was coming. They parked 3 blocks from the warehouse, far enough to avoid being obvious. The vans disgorged officers into the night, and everyone moved towards staging positions with practiced silence. The industrial district was dark, most buildings empty, occasional security lights creating pools of illumination between long stretches of shadow. Marcus stayed with Team Charlie, 4 officers plus himself. The team leader was Sergeant Hayes, a compact black man with 20 years on the force and the calm demeanor of someone who'd been in firefights before. He reviewed the approach one final time, quiet voice barely audible. "We move on Carmen's signal. Side entrance, quick and quiet. Stack formation. Webb stays in the middle. We clear each room before advancing. Questions? Headshakes all around. Good. Check your gear." Marcus did a final pat-down of his medical kit, making sure everything was secure. His heart was beating fast now, adrenaline starting to flow. This feeling was familiar, the pre-combat readiness he'd experienced dozens of times before. His body knew what to do, even if his conscious mind was screaming that this was insane. His radio crackled, Carmen's voice. "All teams, status, Alpha in position." That was the team at the front entrance. "Bravo in position. The rear loading dock. Charlie ready." Hayes's voice, steady and sure. "Stand by." 30 seconds. The wait was excruciating. Marcus could hear his own breathing, could hear the subtle sounds of equipment creaking as officers shifted weight, could hear the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Everything felt heightened, every sense sharp. "Alpha, execute distraction. Bravo, hold position. Charlie, breach on my mark." The night erupted with sound from the front of the warehouse, flashbangs detonating with concussive force, officers shouting, "Police! Search warrant!" The crash of a battering ram against metal, all designed to draw attention to make the occupants think the main assault was coming through the front. "Charlie, go!" Hayes moved, and the rest of Team Charlie followed. They covered the distance to the side entrance in seconds, moving in a tight group. Hayes tried the door. Locked. One of the officers, a woman named Brennan, produced a breaching tool and worked the lock with practiced efficiency. It took her 10 seconds. The door swung open. Darkness beyond. Hayes went through first, weapon up, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Marcus followed in the middle of the stack, acutely aware that he was unarmed, completely dependent on the officers around him. They were in a corridor, concrete walls, pipes running overhead, empty. Hayes moved forward, clearing each doorway methodically. Behind them, the sounds of the distraction at the front entrance continued. More flashbangs, more shouting. They reached an intersection. Hayes signaled and the team split, 2 officers going left, 2 going right with Marcus between them. They were inside the main warehouse space now, a vast open area filled with crates and pallets and industrial shelving, perfect for ambushes. Brennan was just ahead of Marcus when the shooting started, muzzle flashes in the darkness, the deafening roar of automatic weapons. Brennan went down, hit in the leg, screaming. Marcus dove for her, dragging her behind a concrete pillar as bullets sparked off metal all around them. Hayes and the other officers returned fire, controlled bursts, trying to identify targets in the chaos. "Officer down!" Marcus shouted into his radio, already pulling out his medical kit. "Team Charlie, we have an officer down." He cut away Brennan's pants leg, found the wound, through and through the thigh, miraculously missing the femoral artery, but still bleeding heavily. He pulled out a tourniquet, wrapped it high on her leg, tightened it with quick, practiced movements. Brennan was still screaming in pain and shock and fury. "You're okay," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm despite the gunfire. "Bullet went through, missed the artery. You're going to be fine." "Hurts like hell." "I know, but you're not dying. Focus on me, okay? I've got you." More gunfire, this time from a different direction. The cartel members were moving, trying to flank them. Hayes was shouting into his radio, calling for backup, for Alpha and Bravo teams to converge on their position. Marcus finished securing the tourniquet, marked the time on Brennan's forehead with a marker, standard trauma protocol, and pulled her further behind cover. "Stay here. Don't move. Where are you going?" "To help the others." He moved forward in a crouch, staying low, staying behind cover. Ahead, he could see Hayes and another officer pinned down by fire from an elevated position, someone on the second floor with a rifle using the high ground advantage. "We need to flank him." Hayes shouted, Marcus scanned the environment, tactical analysis kicking in automatically. There, an external staircase, partially hidden by shadow. If he could get there, he could direct the officers to a better position. He keyed his radio. "Hayes, stairs at 2 o'clock. If you can draw his fire, I can spot him for you." "You're not armed." "Don't need to be. Just need eyes." "Negative, Webb." Too dangerous. But Marcus was already moving, using the crates and pallets as cover, reaching the base of the stairs. He climbed quickly, staying low, and reached a vantage point where he could see the second-floor catwalk. There, a man with a rifle, positioned behind cover, firing down at the officers below. Marcus could see his profile, could see the tactical vest, the professional way he moved and fired. He keyed his radio. "Hayes, target on the second-floor catwalk, northwest corner, behind the green machinery. He's leaning out to fire. Rhythm is every 5 seconds. Copy, stand by." Marcus watched, counting. The shooter leaned out, fired a burst. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hayes's shot was perfect. The shooter jerked, dropped his rifle, collapsed. "Target down," Hayes confirmed. The gunfire slackened, became more sporadic. Alpha and Bravo teams were pushing in now, coordinating with Charlie, overwhelming the defenders. It took another 5 minutes of controlled chaos, but eventually the shooting stopped. The warehouse lights came on, revealing the scene in harsh fluorescent reality. Marcus came down from the stairs, found Brennan where he'd left her, pale but stable. Paramedics were rushing in now, taking over her care. Other officers were securing prisoners, 6 men in handcuffs, being led out to waiting patrol cars. Carmen found Marcus in the warehouse, checking him for injuries, even though he hadn't been hit. "You okay?" "Fine." Brennan took a round, but she'll recover. "I heard. You saved her life." "Just did my job." "Your job was to consult, not climb into active firefights." Marcus looked at her evenly. "My job is to keep people alive. Sometimes that means going where the fighting is." Carmen shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're crazy, you know that." "I've been told. The warehouse operation yielded results. 20 kilos of cocaine, cash, weapons, and most importantly, intelligence, documents, computer records, information that connected the Portland operation to larger networks across the West Coast. It was a significant victory, one that would disrupt the cartel's operations for months. But it came at a cost. Officer Brennan would recover, but she'd need months of physical therapy. 2 other officers had minor injuries, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty that the cartel would retaliate. They always did. Captain Shaw held a debrief at 3 a.m., everyone exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. "Good work tonight, everyone." This operation dealt a serious blow to the Morales organization. But stay alert, they're going to come back at us, and when they do, they'll be angry. Marcus sat in the back of the room, not participating, just observing. He'd done what he came to do, trained the officers, planned the operation, kept casualties to a minimum. His obligation was fulfilled. But when Shaw dismissed everyone, the captain caught Marcus before he could leave. "A word, Mr. Webb." They stepped into Shaw's office. Through the window, dawn was starting to break, pale light creeping across the city. Shaw sat behind his desk, looking older than his years, the weight of command evident in the lines of his face. "You did good tonight," Shaw said. "Better than good. You saved lives. Brennan saved her own life by being in the right position. I just stopped the bleeding. Don't downplay it. Without you, we'd have multiple casualties, maybe fatalities." Shaw paused. "I want you to stay on. Permanent consultant. Work with us full-time." Marcus had known this was coming. "No. Why not?" "Because I have a daughter to raise. Because I'm not a cop. Because this isn't my fight." "You keep saying that, but your actions suggest otherwise." "My actions tonight were a one-time thing. You needed help. I provided it. Now it's done." Shaw leaned back in his chair. "What if I told you we found something tonight?" Something connected to your wife's case. Marcus went very still. What did you find? Documents in the warehouse. Communications between the Morales organization and their operation in Sacramento from 5 years ago. Shaw opened a folder, pulled out photocopies of text messages. They reference an operation against a police officer. Date matches when your wife was killed. Names match the suspects we could never identify. Marcus took the papers with hands that didn't quite feel like his own. He read the messages. Clinical detachment warring with old rage. Plans to ambush a patrol officer. Confirmation that it was completed successfully. Congratulations on eliminating a problem. Lisa. They were talking about Lisa. We've forwarded this to Sacramento PD, Shaw said quietly. They're reopening the case. With this evidence, they can make arrests. Marcus set the papers down carefully on the desk. Thank you for telling me. Is that all you have to say? What else is there? This doesn't bring her back. Doesn't change what happened. No. But maybe it gives you closure. Marcus stood. Closure is a myth, Captain. There's no such thing. There's just learning to carry the weight better. He left the office, left the station, drove home as the sun rose fully over Portland. The city looked clean and new in the morning light, as if the night's violence had never happened. People were starting their days, going to work, living normal lives. He envied them that normalcy. Sophia was waiting when he arrived to pick her up from the sleepover, bouncing on her toes with the energy only 11-year-olds possessed. Can we get pancakes now? Absolutely. They went to their favorite diner, sat in their usual booth, ordered too much food. Sophia chatted about her sleepover, about school, about her friends. Normal, safe, the things that mattered. Dad? She asked between bites of pancake. Are you done helping the police now? Marcus considered lying, then decided she deserved better. I think so. Last night was what they needed help with. Now they can handle things on their own. Good. I was worried. About what? That you'd decide to do it full time, and then something would happen to you. She looked at him with eyes too old for her age. I already lost Mom. I can't lose you too. Marcus reached across the table, took her hand. You're not going to lose me. I promise. You promise you'll be careful? I promise. She smiled, reassured by his words, even though they both knew promises couldn't guarantee safety. But sometimes, promises were all you had. The next few weeks passed quietly. Marcus returned to his delivery route, driving supplies to mountain stores, living his peaceful, ordinary life. He heard through Carmen that the arrests had been made in Sacramento. 3 men, all connected to the Morales organization, all charged with Lisa's murder. It made the news, a small story on page 6 about cold case solved through new evidence. Marcus didn't feel vindicated, didn't feel closure, just felt tired. But life continued. Sophia's school year progressed, seasons changed, and gradually Marcus realized that something had shifted. The constant low-level anger he'd carried for 5 years, the sense of unfinished business, it was fading. Not gone, never gone, but less consuming. One evening in late November, Carmen called. How are you doing? She asked. Fine. You? Good. Listen, I wanted to let you know. We've been implementing the training protocols you taught us, making them permanent part of our officer development, and we're getting results. Fewer injuries on operations, better tactical awareness. You made a real difference. Glad to hear it. There's something else. Officer Martinez, Jordan. She's been talking about starting a civilian first response training program, teaching regular people basic trauma care. She wants to know if you'd be willing to help. Marcus thought about this. Civilians learning medical skills, people trained to help each other when emergencies happened. What would that look like? Classes once a week, evening sessions, teaching CPR, wound care, basic triage. Nothing advanced, just enough to keep someone alive until paramedics arrive. Why Jordan? Because almost dying made her realize how unprepared most people are, and she wants to change that. Marcus remembered Jordan lying in the rain, bleeding out, whispering that backup wasn't coming. Remembered carrying her through the forest. Remembered the terror of thinking he might not save her. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." 2 days later, Marcus met Jordan at a coffee shop. She was fully recovered now, back in uniform, with a new scar she wore proudly. They ordered drinks and sat in a quiet corner. "Carmen said you wanted to talk about a training program," Marcus said. Jordan nodded. "After what happened to me, I started thinking, how many people die every year because no one around them knows what to do? Car accidents, heart attacks, choking, bleeding, all things that could be survivable if someone had basic training. There are already first aid courses available. Sure, through the Red Cross, community centers, but they're not widely attended. I want to make it accessible, free classes, no requirements, just come learn, get the skills." "And you want me to teach?" "I want us both to teach. You bring the medical expertise, I bring the law enforcement perspective. Together we could reach people." Marcus sipped his coffee, considering. "I have a job, a daughter. I can't commit to something that takes too much time. 1 night a week. 3 hours, that's all. Where would we hold classes?" "Community center downtown has space. They're willing to donate it if we can get the program running. Equipment, supplies, grants, donations, the department's willing to help fund it." Marcus looked at Jordan, really looked at her. She believed in this. She'd almost died, and instead of retreating, she was pushing forward, trying to make something good from something terrible. That took courage. "Okay," he said, "I'm in." Jordan grinned. "Really? Really? But we do it right. Proper curriculum, real training, actual skills, no shortcuts. Wouldn't have it any other way." They spent the next month planning. Developed a curriculum covering CPR, bleeding control, choking response, recognizing heart attacks and strokes. Created simple, clear training materials. Recruited volunteers to help with demonstrations. Publicized the program through social media and community outreach. The first class was scheduled for January, and Marcus wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe a few people would show up. Maybe none. 50 people filled the community center that first night. Older adults and teenagers, parents and students, people from every background imaginable. All of them wanting to learn. All of them recognizing that knowing these skills might one day save someone they loved. Marcus and Jordan taught for 3 hours. They demonstrated CPR on mannequins, showed how to pack a wound and apply pressure, walked through the signs of shock and how to respond. The students were attentive, engaged, asking good questions. At the end of the session, a woman in her 50s approached Marcus. "Thank you for this. My husband had a heart attack last year. I didn't know what to do. I just froze. If I'd known then what you taught us tonight, maybe he'd still be alive." Marcus felt the weight of those words. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Me too. But maybe now I can help someone else's husband. That's something, right? That's everything." The program grew. Word spread. More people came. Marcus found himself looking forward to teaching nights, to the sense of purpose it gave him. This was different from the violence of military operations or police raids. This was building instead of destroying. This was making sure people could save each other. Sophia noticed the change in him. One evening, watching him prepare materials for class, she said, "You seem happier, Dad." "Do I?" "Yeah, like you found something you were looking for." "Maybe I did." "What was it?" Marcus thought about how to explain. You know how sometimes you feel like you're supposed to be doing something specific, but you don't know what it is, and then suddenly you find it and everything makes sense? Sophia nodded. Like when I discovered I liked painting. Exactly like that. So teaching people is your painting? He smiled. Something like that. 6 months passed. The training program became a fixture in the community. Marcus and Jordan taught hundreds of people. They heard stories back. Someone used CPR to save a drowning victim. Someone stopped bleeding after a car accident. Someone recognized stroke symptoms and called 911 in time. Lives saved because people knew what to do. One afternoon, Carmen called again. Webb, got a situation. Need your opinion. What kind of situation? The cartel's making noise again. We think they're planning retaliation for the warehouse raid. Captain Shaw wants to know if you'd consult on our defensive protocols. Marcus felt the old resistance rising. He'd told himself he was done with that world. But Carmen was asking, which meant people might be in danger. When? Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll be there. At the station, Shaw and Carmen laid out the intelligence. The Morales organization had been rebuilding, bringing in new people, reorganizing their operations. And they'd put out a contract on the officers involved in the warehouse raid. How credible is the threat? Marcus asked. Very. We have 3 independent sources confirming it. They're planning something big. Marcus reviewed the list of names. Officers who'd been in the warehouse that night, including Jordan. What's your security protocol? Increased patrols, officers traveling in pairs, surveillance on known cartel locations. That's reactive. You need to be proactive. Meaning? Meaning you find out where they're operating from now and you hit them first. Take the offensive before they can organize. Shaw shook his head. We don't have enough evidence for warrants. And without warrants, anything we find gets thrown out in court. Then get evidence. Work your informants, build the case, but do it fast before they make their move. We're trying. But these things take time. You don't have time. If there's a contract out, they're already in motion. The warning proved prophetic. 3 days later, someone took a shot at Officer Hayes, the sergeant who'd led Team Charlie. The bullet missed, hitting his windshield instead, but the message was clear. The cartel was done waiting. Shaw instituted emergency protocols. All officers on the target list were given protection details. Off-duty officers carried weapons. Families were moved to secure locations. The station went into lockdown mode, and Marcus, against every instinct telling him to stay out of it, found himself back in the middle of everything. I need you to review our security measures, Shaw said. Find the weaknesses before they do. Marcus spent a week analyzing the police department's defensive posture. He identified vulnerabilities, predictable patrol routes, inadequate surveillance in certain areas, officers whose daily routines were too consistent. He made recommendations, implemented changes, trained officers in counter-surveillance techniques, but he knew it wasn't enough. Defense only went so far. Eventually, the cartel would find an opening. The attack came on a Tuesday evening. Jordan was leaving a training session at the community center when 2 men approached her in the parking lot. They had guns, they had intent, they had orders. What they didn't have was the element of surprise. Marcus had been waiting. He'd known Jordan was the most vulnerable target. Public location, predictable schedule, visible presence in the community. He'd posted himself nearby, watching, ready. When the 2 men approached, Marcus was already moving. He came up behind the first one, disarmed him with a wristlock he'd learned decades ago, put him face first into the pavement. The second man turned, raising his weapon, and Marcus was on him before he could fire. A strike to the throat, a leg sweep, the gun clattering away across the asphalt. Jordan had her service weapon out, covering both men from behind her car. Police! Don't move! Marcus stepped back, hands visible, letting her take control. She called for backup, kept the suspects covered until patrol cars arrived minutes later. Later in the station, Shaw looked at Marcus with something like awe. "You've been watching her. Not just her. All of them. Anyone on the target list. For how long?" "Since you told me about the contract." "That's 3 weeks." "Yeah. You have a job. A daughter." I adjusted my schedule. Shaw shook his head slowly. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because if I told you, you'd have tried to stop me. Or worse, you'd have assigned officers to do it, which would have pulled resources from other areas. This way, you had an extra pair of eyes without using up manpower. You could have been killed. And so could Jordan, and Hayes, and all the others. I wasn't going to let that happen." Carmen, who'd been listening silently, said, "The men we arrested are talking. They're giving up their contacts, their organization. This is going to break the retaliation plot wide open." "Good," Marcus said. "Then maybe we can all get back to normal." But Shaw wasn't done. "There's something you need to understand, Webb. What you did, the surveillance, the intervention, everything, that makes you part of this. You're not on the sidelines anymore. You're in it." "I'm just helping out." "No, you're committed. There's a difference." Shaw leaned forward. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Come work for us. Not as an officer, as a specialized consultant. Your job would be exactly what you've been doing. Training, security assessment, protecting our people, but officially with support and resources." Marcus looked at Carmen, at Shaw, at the station around him. Then he thought about Jordan, about the hundreds of people he'd trained in first response, about Sophia at home trusting him to come back safely. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough. Take your time." Marcus went home, made dinner, helped Sophia with homework. The routine centering him, reminding him what mattered. After Sophia went to bed, he sat on the porch in the dark, thinking. Lisa would have told him to do it. She'd always believed in service, in standing up when people needed help. She'd worn a badge for that reason, had died for it. And every day Marcus tried to honor her memory by raising Sophia right, by being present, by not chasing the ghosts of his past. But maybe honoring her memory also meant continuing the fight she'd started. Maybe staying on the sidelines when people needed him wasn't protection. It was cowardice. The next morning, Marcus called Shaw. "I'll do it. Part-time, 3 days a week, and I set my own hours so I can be there for my daughter." "Done. When can you start?" "Already started, Captain." Already started. And so Marcus Webb, former Army medic, delivery truck driver, single father, became something new. A bridge between civilian life and law enforcement, a teacher, a protector, a man who'd walked away from violence and found himself pulled back, but on his own terms this time. The work wasn't glamorous. Most days involved reviewing protocols, teaching classes, analyzing threats that never materialized. But occasionally, when an officer was injured, when a civilian needed help, when violence erupted, Marcus was there, doing what he'd always done, keeping people alive. 2 years passed. The training program expanded to multiple locations across the city. Hundreds became thousands, people trained in life-saving skills, ready to help when emergencies struck. The police department's casualty rate dropped as officers implemented better tactical procedures. The cartel's influence waned as arrests mounted and operations were disrupted, and Marcus found something he'd thought lost forever. Purpose that didn't require him to sacrifice everything else he valued. On a spring morning, Marcus stood in front of his newest training class. 50 faces looked back at him, eager and nervous. At the back of the room, Sophia sat with Jordan, both of them there to support him. Sophia was 13 now, taller, starting to look more like her mother every day. "Welcome to emergency first response training," Marcus began. "Over the next few weeks, I'm going to teach you skills that might save someone's life. Maybe a stranger's, maybe a loved one's, maybe your own. These aren't complicated techniques. They're simple, practical, and proven. But you have to be willing to act when the moment comes. Because the hardest part isn't knowing what to do, it's having the courage to do it. He saw understanding in their faces, fear too. That was natural. Fear kept you alert, kept you careful. The trick was not letting it stop you. Most people freeze in emergencies, Marcus continued. It's a normal response. Your brain sees danger and tries to protect you by shutting down. But we're going to train that response out of you. We're going to practice until your hands move automatically, until helping becomes instinct. And when you're done, you'll walk out of here knowing that if someone needs help, you can provide it. That's power. That's real power. Not over others, but over circumstances, over fear, over helplessness. He picked up a training mannequin. Let's start with CPR. Who here knows what to do if someone's heart stops? A few hands went up, tentative. Good. Now let me show you how to do it right. For the next 3 hours, Marcus taught. He demonstrated, guided, corrected, encouraged, just like he'd done hundreds of times before. Just like he'd do hundreds of times more. Because this was his mission now, not carrying a rifle, not treating wounds in combat zones, but teaching people to save each other, building capacity for help instead of harm, creating a community where knowledge flowed freely and skill was accessible to everyone. When the class ended and students filed out, chattering excitedly about what they'd learned, Sophia approached. You're really good at this, Dad. Thanks, kiddo. Mom would be proud. Marcus felt his throat tighten. You think so? I know so. You're doing what she did, helping people, making things better, just in a different way. He pulled her into a hug. This daughter who'd grown so much, who'd survived loss and come out stronger. I love you, Sophia. Love you too. Jordan joined them. Great session today. I think we're making a real difference. We are. One person at a time. Speaking of which, I got an email from a school district in Seattle. They want to implement our program. Think you could do a train-the-trainer session? Marcus considered. Seattle was a few hours away. He'd need to arrange overnight childcare for Sophia. But spreading the program meant more people learning, more lives potentially saved. Yeah, I can make that work. Perfect. I'll coordinate with them. They walked out together into sunshine and possibility. Somewhere in the city, someone was having an emergency. Someone's heart was stopping. Someone was choking. Someone was bleeding. And maybe, just maybe, there was another person nearby who'd taken Marcus's class, who knew what to do, who didn't freeze. That thought made him smile, not because emergencies were happening, but because people were ready for them. His truck sat in the parking lot, familiar and reliable. He climbed in, Sophia beside him, and started the engine. As he pulled out onto the street, heading toward home and whatever came next, Marcus thought about the long road that had brought him here, the war, the loss, the anger, the slow climb back to something like peace. It hadn't been linear, hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, because somewhere in Portland, Officer Jordan Martinez was alive. Hundreds of civilians had skills they could use to help others. The police department was better prepared, better trained, more effective. And a 13-year-old girl still had her father. None of that undid the past. Lisa was still gone. The violence Marcus had seen and participated in still happened. The world was still dangerous, still broken in fundamental ways. But it was also full of people trying to fix it, people learning to help each other, people refusing to freeze when action was needed. And Marcus Webb, who'd once thought his fighting days were over, had found a new way to fight, not with weapons, but with knowledge, not with violence, but with preparation, not by destroying, but by protecting. Some nights he still dreamed of rain and blood and voices calling for backup that never came. But more often now, he dreamed of classrooms full of students, of lives saved by simple interventions, of a daughter growing up safe and strong. Those were good dreams, worth fighting for, worth teaching for, worth living for. And as he drove through streets filled with people living their ordinary lives, working, shopping, laughing, loving, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness, exactly. The scars ran too deep for that. But contentment. The sense that he was where he belonged, doing what he was meant to do. The bracelet on his wrist caught the light, its worn surface reflecting the sun. Never leave a fallen. He'd carried those words through war and loss and everything after, and he'd realized, finally, what they truly meant. Not just saving people in the moment of crisis, but making sure the people around them had the skills to save them too, creating communities where help was always nearby because everyone knew how to provide it. That was the mission now, and he'd keep fighting it. One class at a time, one student at a time, one saved life at a time for as long as he was able, because that's what Lisa would have wanted, that's what Sophia needed, and that's what Marcus Webb, former soldier and current teacher, finally understood to be his true calling. Not the warrior who brings death, but the healer who prevents it, not the destroyer, but the builder, not the fighter, but the teacher. And in that role, he'd found his peace.